Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to show you how I painted this giant robot. Actually, it's not that giant, it's only 10 centimeters tall, but let's just pretend. This is, in fact, the Metzger Robot for Dystopian Wars. I don't really know much about Dystopian Wars, or if it's even still a thing, but I have some models for it and I do rather like this robot. This is going to be a rather quick and simple paint job. There isn't a whole lot to it, but I do like it. No sense in jibber-jabbering, let's get to the painting. I started by priming the model in black and then base coating with Vallejo Model Air gunmetal. Because I'm a numpty, I didn't actually film the base coating, but I'm sure you can imagine how that might have looked. The next thing I did was to apply a fairly heavy dry brushing with Model Air steel. Model Air colours aren't generally ideal for dry brushing because they are quite thin, but this has worked pretty well. I mostly apply this on the upper areas and some of the raised sharper edges and details. It's probably kind of hard to see on camera, but this does add a smoother, brighter, shiny colour than the base colour, which is what I was going for. Though I didn't want that all over the model, I still wanted some of the darker colour in areas. Next, I applied a wash of army painted dark tone. This was thinned roughly 3 parts dark tone mixed with 1 part water. I applied this all over the robot, making sure not to let it pool up too much anywhere. The idea here is to add some depth and interest to the metallic colour. I don't really want this robot to be super bright and shiny. This wash should add some darkness to any gaps and recesses, while also darkening down and adding some variation to the flat surfaces. This was effective enough. Next, to bring out the edges and raised detail, I apply another dry brushing with the Model Air steel. I do this a bit lighter than the previous dry brushing, focusing mostly on the edges and raised bits. The idea is to bring those out and add further variation and interest to the overall silvery colour. In my opinion, it now looks much more interesting than it did with just the base coat and first dry brushing. Other than a little bit of weathering, it's mostly going to stay this way, so I do want to get as much variation and visual interest in this as possible without having to add extra colours. From what I've seen, it's pretty common for Dystopian Wars stuff to have both silvery colours alongside bronze and gold. I don't really want that, so I'm only going to use one metallic colour. Well, technically two, but it's the same sort of colour, so you know what I mean. I might be starting to waffle. Anyway, I continue using Model Air steel, but this time I'm using a brush. I apply this to some little bits that look like hydraulic rams. There are 2 of these at the front and rear of each foot. They're not super obvious, but I figured applying a solid steel colour here would help bring them out and add some interest. There seems to be one of these on either side of the waist as well, so I painted that ram looking bit with steel too. This part on the inside of the left arm also looks like it might be some kind of ram, so I applied steel to that too. Why not? It might be subtle, but it does add a little something. Same goes for these little rings on the arm with the grapple thing, if that's what it is. I've got no idea if this is any kind of hydraulic ram, I just wanted to add a bit of variation. Let's start applying some other colours. I take some Model Air black and apply it into the gaps between the round bits on the hip and knee joint areas. I guess that's what you would call them anyway. I figured doing this would add a bit of depth to those areas. It looks good to me anyway. I also added this to the tube behind the fin things on this gun arm, whatever they are or are supposed to do. I am being a bit careful here, but it's not too big a deal to make mistakes. I'll just touch them up again with some steel later if I do make a mistake. I add some black into this recess on the right arm, again because I thought it might be interesting and break up the single colour a little bit. I added it to the front of this grappling thing too for the same reason. I did this a bit messily. I did want the dome in the centre to be steel, and obviously I've got quite a bit of black on it. No need to worry though, I just touched it up later. You might have noticed that I forgot to add the black into the front of the knee joint. That's okay, I noticed and fixed it before it was too late. Then I tried to paint the cross on the robot's helmet. I almost immediately regretted this. I thought it would be as simple as painting across the top of the cross, but it's not that well moulded and has weird edges. That's okay though, I went back later and fixed it. I also lightly dry brushed Model Air steel over it so that it looks more blended in with the helmet. I didn't film that, but you'll probably see the change somewhere later in the video. Moving on, I figured why not colour the gun barrels on the left arm. For these, I used Vallejo Model Color Black Grey. We could come up with some theory why the gun barrels are a different colour, but I'm too lazy. It's just to make things a bit more varied. I also applied this colour to the zigzaggy shapes in the side of the chest here, though it was a bit hard to get a good shot while painting this. I did the same thing with the crossbar things in the back. Again, a bit hard to see against the shiny metal colour. And now for another grey colour. This time I apply AK Interactive rubber tyres to the inner part of the claws. I figure maybe these could be rubber pads, perhaps to prevent damage to the claw itself or maybe better grip things. I don't know. It just seemed like a way to add a bit of variation without adding bright colours. Then I thought, why not add some bright colours? I felt like some red would be nice, so I used Vallejo Model Color Red. Just plain old red. I first painted this pair of tanks. I've no idea what these are supposed to be for, and it doesn't really matter. They're a perfect candidate for adding a colour. They were pretty easy and accessible to paint as well. Just don't put the red on areas you don't want to be red, and it should be fine. As you can see, there is one of these on either side. I didn't think this was quite enough red, so I painted the pipes that run up the back of what I'm assuming to be exhausts. As you can see, I'm only painting the pipe and leaving the raised bar parts around it metallic. Obviously I'm being careful here, but this is another area that should be easy enough to fix mistakes on. I'm pretty happy with how this is looking, and I think this shade of red goes nicely with silvery colours, so I figured why not add a bit more. And I painted these pipes on the legs. I do like that these details are fairly raised. It makes them easier to paint neatly. Again, I've no idea what they're meant to be, but they're red now, and I think it looks pretty good. One more bit of red. This little bit of what I'm assuming is more pipe in the side of the chest here. It kind of looks like a handle, but this thing is meant to be hundreds of meters tall, so it's probably a pipe. After this, I used both metallic colours and did various touch-ups around the model to neaten things up, and I didn't really think that was worth filming. Once that was done, I used Vallejo Model Air Scarlet and painted the dome thing in the centre of the grappling arm. I used this colour instead of the other red because it's thinner and a little bit less opaque, so the shininess underneath has more of a chance to shine through. It is kind of subtle, but I think it worked. Not quite as well as I'd hoped, but that's okay. Then I applied some gloss varnish because I'm moving on to the enamels. I didn't really feel like there was much on the front of the model to add any colours to, so I figured I could probably add some extra interest on the front using weathering. I started with AK Interactive Landing Gear Wash, because why not? I apply this in various places like the vision slot on the helmet, which I guess might actually be windows. I also add it to the porthole looking things and various vents around the robot. Also the exhaust things. I then remove the excess of this, trying to streak it downwards from things like the portholes, if they are in fact portholes. I apply, remove and reapply this a few times until I'm satisfied with it. I apply a bit more of this in a more messy manner the lower on the robot I go. I'm trying to get it in recesses and gaps where it makes sense. It does also darken down the flat surfaces in places too, which is a bonus. I figured it was a good idea to get this in the vents on the back of the legs too. Overall, this is meant to be a grimy layer. Then, without adding any gloss varnish, I start with some AK Interactive Dark Streaking Grime. I mostly apply this to the portholes on the legs, then I partially remove it with downward strokes, to cause streaking, as you sometimes do with streaking grime. I also put a little bit of this on the feet, but I didn't film it because I'm a dunderhead. Next, I take some AK Interactive Exhaust Wash, which I've never used before, but I figured why not see what it's like. I began with this by applying it around the sides of the exhaust things. Then I decided to add it running down the porthole things and down the rivet details on the vertical surfaces, and then removing a bit and streaking it with a clean or cleanish brush with clean thinner on it. Pretty much the same way I always use enamels. I liked the way this looked. It's kind of like dirt and grime, but not quite like rust. This doesn't really look to me like something that should be rusty. I continued using this colour down the body, particularly on the portholes around the leg bits. Might as well be consistent with the upper portholes, right? Then I had a minor accident. The popsicle sticks coming unglued isn't so unusual, but it did happen a few times while painting this. Unfortunately, a relatively gentle drop was enough to remove the right arm. This is yet another reason I don't really like resin and metal. Anyway, I continued applying the exhaust wash, removing, streaking, reapplying it where I felt it needed it. Nothing especially unique or difficult here. I'm pretty happy with how this worked out. It made things look dirty without, in my opinion, becoming overbearing. I then glued the arm back on, and then applied another layer of gloss varnish. I then decided on adding some mud. I used AK Interactive Dark Mud here, which seemed like an appropriate choice. Because this thing is meant to be so big, I didn't think it would make much sense to add too much mud, so I only added a little bit around the feet. Though it did kind of end up, at least in my opinion, looking more like dust than actual mud. I guess it doesn't really matter what you call it, it's a brown stain. Like the other enamels, I applied and removed this until I was satisfied with the result. Easy enough. Then, I thought, maybe that's enough. I didn't feel like I could add anything else without things just going overboard and getting way too dirty and muddy looking. I didn't want this to be totally clean, but I also didn't want it to be disgustingly filthy. Just a bit dirty. I then applied a coat of satin varnish. If you want to know, I used the Minotaur satin. I figured the robot would look nice if it were somewhat shiny. I usually do everything with a matte coat, so why not try satin this time? And that's it. The Metzger Robot for Dystopian Wars is now complete. I bet this could find use in other games too, particularly games that involve robots, for some reason. I'll leave you to decide what those games might be. I'm pretty happy with the result I got here. Sure, it's not overly complicated, but it doesn't need to be. Sometimes simple is best. I think the metallics have worked pretty well considering the limited paints I used. And it is a bit hard to see on camera, but there is a fair bit of variation in those base colours. And I don't think I would be as satisfied with this if it were just a mess of different colours, just for the sake of having different colours. The result of that is that this was a fairly quick and easy paint job, which is pretty much exactly what I wanted. I've been a bit strapped for time this month, and in my mind, doing something quick and simple like this is better than doing nothing. I've had this model sitting around unpainted on my shelf for quite a long while now, and I don't think I ever even did a build video for it. It was pretty simple to put together though. I think it's made up of 6, maybe 7 parts. The torso with the legs already attached, arms, feet, and grappling part. Pretty simple. I do have some other Dystopian Wars models laying around, but they're not a priority to paint. I don't currently intend to build a force, and I don't even know the status of the game. I mean, I could Google it, but I'm pretty lazy, and then I would have to stop working on this video. Anyway, even if I never play Dystopian Wars, I still have a cool robot, and for me, that's a win. I don't often paint metallics, so I thought this might be a fun way to do that. I do like how the Model Air metallics worked out, though I did think about trying some other metallics. I didn't want to spend the time finding ones that looked good and then either going to get them or waiting for them to arrive, because that would have caused further delay in making this video, and it's already late enough. That said, if anybody has suggestions for nice metallic paints, I would be interested to hear them. Let me know in the comments section below. For those interested, I will include a list of the paints I've used in the description below. There's not really a whole lot there, but lists make things nice and easy. So what do you think? Have you got one of these Metzger robots? Are you into Dystopian Wars? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, why not subscribe, follow, ring the bell, and all the other things you do on YouTube and social media. Links to all of the things, including my Patreon and my Twitch channel, are in the description below. There's also a join button down there somewhere if you would like to become a member. And as always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other and thanks for watching. Farewell.